ICS3C lesson on functions. And these aren't the built-in kind. These are the kind that we write ourselves, and these aren't the math kind. These are the computer science kind, functions. And notice that I've got it covered up here. You don't have this note. I think it's time for you to take some of your own notes and practice your typing skills, that sort of thing. So remember, if I'm going too fast, you can always pause. It's not that, this shouldn't be that long of a note when I'm setting out here. At least I'm planning to it for it to be fairly short. Functions. When we break up a bigger task into smaller tasks, several programmers can work on the same project. We can easily reuse code. So when we write a function, and you've got an idea from Code Academy what functions are all about, we can grab a function and put it in a different program because it's almost like a separate little piece of code. Our code's easier to understand because in our programs, well, we know that this function goes off and does something, then returns a value. It's easier to read that way. It doesn't, when it's split up into smaller tasks, it's easier to understand. We accomplish this using subprograms called functions and procedures, and I'll talk a little bit about the difference between functions and procedures in a second. But these ideas they're little sub bits of code, subprograms. A function returns a value while a procedure just accomplishes some task without returning a value. So a function sends something back to the program, and a procedure just accomplishes a task. Now, what's weird is in JavaScript, there's little difference between coding a function and coding a procedure. And in fact, there's all that we'll see soon. The code always use the word function. Function is a keyword in JavaScript. We'll never see the word procedure at all. Okay, so what does this look like? Let me cover this up here a little bit. So this is the basic setup of a function in Java. We use the keyword bar, and then whatever we want to call the function, that's up to us. It's in italics there. Function name can be anything we want. Usually it's some sort of verb, as we'll see. It's not usually it's because the function does something for you. It calculates your pay, or it decides on a mark, or it sets a certain value, or it accomplishes some sort of task. And then function is a keyword, and then there's a bracket followed by any number of variables. You know, and the P1, P2, P3, we'll talk about what that means before. And then in these curly brackets are whatever commands we want. A bunch of commands that do something. And if we have the keyword return, that's a function. If there's no keyword return, that's not in there at all, then we would think of it as a procedure. And notice you don't have to have a return command. If you didn't have a return command, we would consider this function a procedure instead of a function, although that's not a big whoop. Notice that, and a function with curly brackets and semicolon. Notes. The stuff in italics are our variable names, and in fact, this should be in italics too. We choose the variable names too. And by the way, if you ever use P1, P2, P3 as variable names, you will get in trouble from Mr. Restall. These should be more meaningful of some sort, you know, like age or phone number or first name, last name. These should describe what they actually are in the function. We can choose whatever we want for those. The bold words are JavaScript keywords. So var has to be there, function has to be there, and return is a keyword. P1, P2, P3 are called parameters and are used in the function. So the idea of these are like inputs to the functions that are used here somewhere. And we'll see an example of that and why we would use that. And hopefully you've seen it in Code Academy as well. But those are parameters. We can have 0, 1, 2, or many parameters. We could have none. We could have no parameters at all. And we'll see that in an example in a second. However, we can only return one thing. There can only be one return statement. Otherwise, um, or it can only return one thing. We might have multiple return statements depending if it's an if or something like that, but we can only return one thing. Now, the thing can be complicated, as we'll see once we have some more skills in JavaScript, but um, only one thing. An example, and I think I attached this code to the website, so you should have this code. This is an example um, of this right here is uh, a formula that calculates the volume. This is the one from the other day. Uh, I called my function calcVolCyl, so short form for calculate the volume of a cylinder. And notice it has two parameters. It has a radius and a height. And then inside, we've got inside here, it has a variable volume, and there's the calculation, and then it returns the volume. Now, notice if we wanted to, and I've got this in Notepad, this is exactly the same code. If I wanted to, I could just say return this. And I'm going to show you that. I could have this line here. And so it saves you a line of code, but that might make your code more difficult to read. Maybe not, but you get the idea. Notice my second function in here has no parameters. It has no return statement. It has no parameters, no return statement. So I would call this a procedure. If you call it a function, that's fine. But in other programming languages, this would be called a procedure because it doesn't return a value. This one returns the volume after it's calculated. This one just says hello. That's it. Now, how do we actually use these functions? Notice if I didn't have these lines at the bottom here, and we'll talk about those later, the functions actually don't do anything on their own. We have to invoke them. We have to call them. We have to apply the functions in order for them to actually do something. And so my program does that. I have a variable. I called it global volume, and I'll talk about global variables in a second. But then there's the function call right there, calcVolCyl 10.2 2.4. So what does this do? Well, the program looks for this function, and then it kind of maps. It says, okay, I'm gonna use 10.2, and then it goes where the radius is. I'm gonna use 2.4, it goes where the height is, and then in the rest of the function, that's what those variables become. The radius becomes 10.2, and the height becomes 10.4, and then it does the calculation and returns the volume. Okay? Now, what's different about this one, and I'll talk about the say hello in a second, when it returns the volume, it has to go somewhere. Notice that if I had this line here, I'm going to just copy this line. I'm going to paste it and paste it again. But if I had that function called without doing anything with it, and I'm going to save this and run it, save it and run it, run in, oh, come on. I forgot. I got to run my JavaScript skeleton. So I'm going to run that in Chrome. Bam, there it is. Let me press F12. There's my log. Aha. Global volume is not defined. What does that mean? Where was that? Oh, right there. Because I commented out that line, so it didn't know what I was talking about there. So I'm gonna comment out that so it doesn't print that out either. Comment out both. The point is that I want to make here is this function return is goofy. So I want to make that point. Run that. Say hello from the function. It didn't have an error, but it didn't actually do anything with this. This is just like having a number sit. We said that that number was 700 and something. It's just sitting there, not being printed out. It's not being assigned for later. You know, I need to do something if there's a return value. So I could have console.log and printed it off right there. That's something I could have done and printed it off. Instead, what I chose to do is I chose to use a variable and put that into that variable. And then I printed it off later. Why did I use 2 lines of code when I could have used one? Essentially, it's because it's better um, programming style to separate the processing and the output. Okay, and we'll talk about that again soon. The last one, so well, okay, rest all. Why didn't you put say hello equal, or like some other variable, var whatever equals that? Well, that's because this function here doesn't return anything. It just does some stuff. So when I'm saying hello, it's just saying, okay, go find this function and do what it does. And so that's what it does. It goes, okay, say hello, it finds that function, runs that, and then when it gets to the end of the curly brackets, it goes back to the main program, which happens to be the end of that program. Okay, dandy. Now I'm going to check my time here. 11 minutes. I'm going to stop and I'm going to talk about global variables and local variables in part 2 of this video.